Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Seth and his family moved into their dream home in Colorado, they expected peace and a fresh start. But when a charming neighbor claimed the house was hers, their quiet life spiraled into a chilling battle of lies, legal warfare, and ultimately, arson. It felt like a new chapter. No, scratch that, an entirely different book. I'd spent nearly 2 decades drafting infrastructure plans, laying out the arteries of cities, but never imagined I'd finally be standing on the porch of my own damn dream. Not a starter home. Not some vinyl-sided box shoved between identical neighbors and HOA surveillance drones. This was a real house, a stone-faced cottage with wooden beams and a wraparound porch tucked away on 1.5 acres outside Fort Collins, Colorado. Fireplace, trees older than me, a garage that actually had space for tools, and a car. Hell, even a rusty weather vane that creaked when the wind came down off the hills. Jill called it our quiet rebellion. I called it peace. And Tommy, our 7-year-old, called it the big tree house on the ground. He'd already claimed the northeast corner of the backyard for a future tree fort, though the tree in question looked like it hadn't been fort-ready since the Reagan administration. We moved in on a crisp Thursday morning, late September, the kind of air that smells like firewood and change. Movers dropped boxes. Jill arranged mugs like there was a kitchen inspector coming. Tommy chased a squirrel and fell in the mud. Normal, beautiful chaos. Around noon, a few neighbors wandered by. One older couple with a welcome basket of honey and soap, a young guy from 2 lots down who offered to help unload, and then her. She pulled up in a silver Lexus SUV like she was arriving for a magazine shoot. Big sunglasses, platinum bob, pristine cardigan even though it was barely 60 outside. She had that look, the suburban regal type, the kind that makes everyone else feel underdressed even in their own driveway. "I brought something sweet," she sang, stepping out with a pie dish covered in foil. "I'm Karen Dorsley. I live just 2 houses that way. Well, temporarily renting, but it's a long story." Jill smiled, being the more diplomatic of the 2 of us. "That's so kind. Thank you. I'm Jill, and this is our son Tommy." "Hi," Tommy shouted through a mouthful of apple slice. Karen leaned down and ruffled his hair like she owned him. "Aren't you a little explorer? You'll love the woods back there. They used to be my favorite." Something in the way she said that made my ears twitch. We invited her onto the porch for a few minutes. She handed over the pie, pecan, still warm, and dropped compliments like confetti. "What a view! That's stonework. Original. You have such good taste." "Oh, I can't believe I'm finally back here." Jill looked puzzled. "Back here? Oh, I didn't say," Karen said, laughing as if caught in some harmless fib. "I used to almost own this place. Years ago, well, sort of. There was an understanding. But I'm just so happy it's being cared for again." She reached over, took Jill's hand between hers, and then turned to me with this dreamy smile. "Thank you, Seth. Really. Thank you for the house. You don't know how long I've waited for this." I blinked. "Sorry?" She laughed again. Light, airy, dismissive. Just a figure of speech. You know how it is, nostalgia and all. I get sentimental about places I loved. Except that's not what it felt like. We made polite excuses, said we had unpacking to do, and she left with a final little wave, and, see you soon. As she backed her car down the gravel, I turned to Jill. "That was odd." Jill just nodded, already peeling back the foil on the pie like it held answers. That night, I replayed her words. Not the compliments, or the baking, or the hair touching. It was that one line. "Thank you for the house." Not "welcome to the neighborhood." Not "I'm so glad someone finally bought it." No thank you. The next morning, it rained. I walked down to the end of the driveway to check the mailbox, more habit than necessity, and found a single crisp envelope. No return address, no postage. Inside was a typed letter formatted like something half legal, half insane. "You are currently residing in a property that is undergoing a process of return. You are required to vacate the premises within 14 days to avoid further action. This is not a negotiation. Duly representing KD." I read it twice. Then I laughed. Out loud, right there in the rain like some lunatic. It had to be a prank. One of those weird new neighbor hazings. I even imagined Karen texting someone, "He's going to freak, LOL." So I folded the letter, brought it inside, and stuck it under the fruit bowl. Jill raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Some kind of joke," I said. "I think Karen's got a sense of humor, or a mental illness. Maybe both." But the next day, I got a delivery by certified mail, this time with a return address, a law office from Loveland. Inside was another letter, on real legal letterhead this time, and a copy of a scanned document. It was a handwritten agreement dated 10 years ago between Karen Dorsley and Samuel W. Hargrave, the man who used to own this house. It read, I.S. Hargrave, acknowledge receipt of partial repayment toward purchase of the above property. In the event full repayment is completed, I agree to return title to Karen Dorsley. No notary, no legal record, just scrawled names and 2 signatures at the bottom, one of them Samuel's, the other I assumed Karen's. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I picked up the phone and called my attorney. By the time my attorney, Rick Bannon, called me back, I'd already read that so-called agreement a dozen times. Each read made it look shakier, sloppier, more like something scribbled on the back of a napkin during a wine-fueled fantasy than an actual contract. But it had enough pretension of legality to make my stomach turn. Rick wasn't laughing. He'd been in real estate law for over 20 years and had a voice like burnt gravel and bourbon. "This looks like garbage," he said flatly. "But the fact she has a lawyer sending it means she's either bluffing hard or delusional enough to think she's got a shot. So what do? We show teeth." The next 48 hours turned surreal. Rick fired off a formal response demanding Karen cease all communications and labeling her claim as meritless and fraudulent. He also submitted copies of our deed, title insurance, and the county's official registry showing no liens or encumbrances, zero legal basis for any third-party interest. We figured that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Instead, Karen escalated. On Monday morning, just after I dropped Tommy off at school and Jill was teaching a remote class in the dining room, I opened the front door to find a man in a beige suit taping a notice to our storm door. He flinched when he saw me, clearly not expecting the homeowner to answer mid-stick. "Can I help you?" I asked, voice low. He cleared his throat. "Temporary civil injunction, sir. Issued this morning." I took the paper and read it standing in the doorway. My jaw clenched tighter with every line. It was a court order, temporary pending review, that forbade us from changing or replacing locks, removing or relocating any physical objects from the home, denying access to claimant party, i.e. Karen Dorsley, pending legal determination. She'd filed a temporary restraining order on our own property. "Jesus Christ," I muttered. "She's trying to play squatters' rights without even living here." Rick called within minutes. "This is nuts, Seth." But she must have walked into that judge's chambers with that agreement and a sob story about a misunderstanding between friends. Some rural judges rubber stamp these things to let the courts sort it out later. So we prepared to fight. The hearing was scheduled for that Thursday. Jill barely slept the night before. She kept imagining Karen showing up with movers, taking our furniture, walking into Tommy's room, and calling it hers. That Thursday, we walked into Larimer County Courthouse like we were stepping into a Western standoff. Karen was already seated, her posture military straight, a smug smile playing on her lips. Her attorney was a younger guy in a sharp blue suit and expensive watch. A confidence shark, the kind that talks to juries like they're children and to opponents like they're stains. Rick opened strong. "Your Honor, the plaintiff has no legal standing. The defendant is the sole registered owner of the property in question. There is no lien, no easement, no recorded transfer. The handwritten note submitted by the plaintiff has no notarization, no legal recognition, and no supporting documentation of repayment, which, by the way, never occurred." Karen's lawyer leaned in. "We're not arguing the legality yet. We're seeking a temporary preservation of access and conditions. Miss Dorsley made partial payments to the previous owner under an agreement to transfer the property upon full repayment. She was denied the opportunity to complete that transfer when the property was sold without her knowledge." Rick didn't flinch. "Even if she had made payments, and there is no proof of that, the original owner sold the property through a court-managed probate auction. The estate had full authority. The plaintiff had no recorded interest, no claim filed during the probate period, and no legal right to interfere in a duly executed sale." The judge, a tired-looking man with reading glasses perched on the edge of his nose, leaned back in his chair. "Let me get this straight, Miss Dorsley," he said slowly. You claim that you were promised this property in exchange for money, yet you never filed a lien, never got anything notarized, never followed through during probate, and only now, after someone else moves in, you assert ownership?" Karen stood. "It wasn't like that. Sam and I had a personal understanding. He told me." "That's enough," the judge said, cutting her off with a raised hand. "This isn't Judge Judy. Legal rights aren't built on promises whispered in kitchens." "Petition for injunction is denied." Karen's mouth twitched. For a second I thought she might cry. She didn't. She exploded. "This is theft," she shouted, startling everyone. "He stole my house. He didn't even know Sam. He never set foot here until last week. That home." The judge banged his gavel once. "Miss Dorsley, control yourself." She turned to Jill. "You think this is over? It's not your house. Not yet." Rick quietly leaned toward me. "That went better than expected, but it's not over. She's unhinged, and I don't think she's done." As we left the courtroom, I glanced back just long enough to see Karen being escorted out by a bailiff. Her attorney looked like he was already regretting taking her case. Back in the car, Jill finally exhaled. "What the hell did we just get ourselves into?" I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing for certain. We weren't dealing with nostalgia or confusion. This woman genuinely believed our home was hers. The first thing I noticed when we pulled into the driveway that Sunday evening was the for sale sign. Only it wasn't our for sale sign. It was a cheap plastic stake job stuck right in the center of our front lawn with the word sold slapped diagonally across it in red block letters. Below that, in smaller text, property reclaimed. Trespassers will be prosecuted. For a moment, I just sat behind the wheel of my truck, blinking at it like it might go away if I looked hard enough. Jill leaned forward in her seat, then turned toward me slowly. "Seth," she said, voice suddenly flat, "where's the porch light?" The porch was dark, completely dark. We had set that light on a timer. It always came on at sunset. Always. Except now, the porch was pitch black. The blinds in the living room were drawn tight, and something about the shape of the front door felt off, like the storm door wasn't closed properly. My stomach dropped. I threw the truck in park and jumped out before Jill could stop me. I got halfway up the walkway before I noticed something else. The front door had a new lock, a completely different model. Silver, not bronze. Modern with a keypad. Ours had been an old-school deadbolt. No keypad. I turned and ran back to the truck. She changed the goddamn locks. Jill looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "What do you mean she?" "She was here while we were gone." Jesus, Jill." She broke in. Jill's face drained of color. I called Rick. I didn't care that it was Sunday night. He answered on the third ring. "You're kidding," he said after I described what I was seeing. "Call the sheriff. Now." "I'll meet you there." 15 minutes later, we stood outside our own house, watching two Larimer County deputies shine their flashlights through the windows while I explained the situation for the third time. "She filed a claim," the taller deputy said, flipping through a tablet, "that she has a standing agreement with the prior owner. She's alleging the property is in legal dispute and says she's exercising rights to preserve the condition of her property." "It's not her property," I snapped. "There's no dispute in court. We won the injunction hearing. This is our house. We live here." "Understood," the deputy said cautiously. "But if she presented any kind of claim to access, even a civil one technically—" "She broke in," I said, forcing myself to stay calm. "She changed the locks, threw out our belongings, and is now squatting inside." The second deputy came over, holding up a small plastic bag. "Found this on the side of the house. Lockpicks. She wasn't using a key." That changed the tone fast. "Let's knock." They walked to the front door and pounded hard 3 times. A few seconds passed. Then the door creaked open just enough to reveal Karen's face, lit dimly from within. She was wearing a lavender sweater and holding a box of cleaning supplies. "Evening, officers," she said sweetly. "I assume this is about my home." "Ma'am," the deputy said, "we need you to step outside. Now." Karen stepped out with visible reluctance. Behind her, we could see boxes, our boxes, pushed into the hallway. Our framed family photo was sitting on the floor near the kitchen like some discarded piece of junk. Our coat rack was gone. "Are you currently residing here?" the officer asked. "I'm reclaiming it," she said with that same calm, creepy certainty. "There was never a real sale." I told them I'd be returning. And I am. I'm just cleaning up. I found a mouse nest in the crawl space. "It's a disaster." Jill stepped forward. You threw out our things. You broke in. I preserved what I could, Karen replied, like she was a curator at a museum. Some things were water damaged. You should have stored them better. I showed the officers the footage from our driveway camera. Karen and two men, faces half covered, arriving Friday evening in a van, breaking the lock, carrying in supplies, tossing our stuff out onto the porch. At one point, one of them actually flipped off the camera. They had no clue we had backup cloud storage. The deputies said they needed to secure the premises and instructed Karen to leave immediately. She acted wounded, betrayed, like someone canceling a family vacation last minute. As she was escorted to her car, she turned to me and said, "You don't understand the history here, Seth. This place, this land, means something. You can't just buy that. You can't steal someone's soul." Then she drove away like nothing had happened. Inside, the house felt wrong. The locks were replaced, sure, but it was more than that. Furniture had been moved. Things were missing. Jill found her jewelry box on the floor of our bedroom, emptied, rifled through. Tommy's closet was rearranged as if someone had been measuring it. She was settling in. We spent that night in a hotel. Jill refused to stay another minute until every lock was changed, the alarm system upgraded, and motion lights installed. I sat in the dark with a bottle of scotch and pulled up the video again. I slowed it down. The second man, he had a familiar gait, same build as the young guy I'd seen standing on Karen's porch during our first walk around the neighborhood. Maybe a nephew, maybe not. I felt like I was in a bad dream wrapped in a lawsuit. But I wasn't sleeping. And I damn sure wasn't leaving. By Monday morning, the shock had burned off and left something colder in its place. Focus. I stopped reacting and started documenting. Every call, every email, every receipt. Rick told me not to touch anything until an inventory was completed, so I walked through the house with a legal pad, room by room, cataloging what was missing and what had been disturbed. It felt invasive, like revisiting a crime scene where the criminal had taken their time. Jill found the first real break by accident. She was sorting through the paperwork from the purchase, looking for the appraisal, when she noticed something odd in the probate documents from the previous owner. Samuel Hargrave hadn't just died quietly and left a house behind. About a year before the date on Karen's handwritten agreement, he had been declared legally incapacitated, dementia, progressive, court documented. Any financial decision after that point required approval from a court-appointed guardian. Karen's agreement was dated squarely inside that window. Rick went very quiet when I told him. Then he said, "That changes everything." Within 48 hours, we hired a forensic document examiner, not a handwriting hobbyist, an expert who testified in court. She didn't even need long. The signature on the agreement showed clear signs of tracing, pressure inconsistencies, hesitation marks. It wasn't just invalid, it was fake. At the same time, Rick filed a criminal complaint for unlawful entry, theft, and document fraud. This time, the sheriff's office didn't hedge. A detective came out, took our statements, copied the footage, and asked questions that actually mattered. Who were the men with her? Did we recognize them? Had Karen ever had keys? She never did, I said. She never lived here. Not once. The detective nodded slowly. Then she didn't reclaim anything. She invaded it. Things escalated fast after that. Karen stopped pretending this was civil. She started lashing out. Code enforcement showed up twice in 1 week after anonymous complaints about illegal structures. A surveyor flagged our old shed as potentially non-compliant until Rick faxed over permits older than the internet. A complaint was filed with the school district questioning Tommy's residency. Another alleged we were renting the property illegally, all traced back to the same source. Then came the confirmation that made my skin crawl. The detective called me late one afternoon. We identified one of the men from the footage, Jason Dorsley, her son, prior convictions for burglary and vehicle theft. He's been living with her off and on. That explained the walk, the posture, the ease with which they broke in. The district attorney's office got involved after that. Not because of us, because of the pattern. Karen had tried to file a quiet title action without standing, used a fraudulent document, coordinated a forced entry, and then attempted to legitimize it through intimidation and bureaucratic harassment. That wasn't confusion. That was strategy. Rick laid it out bluntly over coffee. She thought if she moved fast enough, acted confident enough, and scared you enough, you'd back down. People do. Most people do. I looked out the window at our house, freshly resecured, floodlights glaring like watchful eyes. She picked the wrong people. We were no longer just defending our home. We were taking it back. It happened on a Wednesday night, just after 2 in the morning. I'd barely slept in weeks. Too many late-night strategy calls with lawyers. Too many half-read court filings open on my laptop. Too many phantom sounds outside the house that made my heart race before I even realized I'd heard them. So when my phone buzzed with the sharp, unmistakable tone of the security alert, motion detected, front steps, I was already halfway conscious. I opened the app, fully expecting to see another stray raccoon, maybe a fluttering branch, or just wind-tossing the plastic tarp we'd thrown over the porch repairs. But no. There was a figure. Human. Crouched low near the base of the porch stairs, silhouetted in grayscale night vision. Hoodie up, face shadowed, moving with an unsettling kind of precision. No hesitation, no missteps. In one hand, unmistakably, a red gas can. My stomach turned cold. I sat bolt upright, breath already ragged. Jill stirred beside me, groggy. I couldn't form the words yet. I was too focused on the screen. The figure poured a line of dark liquid, thick, deliberate, starting at the base of the porch steps and curving it across the flower bed under the living room window. The same window Jill had just finished decorating last week, still lined with those cheap ceramic pumpkins she loved from the fall clearance aisle. Dumb things, but she'd smiled so big putting them out, like claiming joy before the HOA could tell us we weren't allowed to have it. Then, on camera, the figure struck a match. Just one. A flash of orange. The flame caught immediately, too fast, like the accelerant had soaked deep into the mulch. The fire jumped to the porch like it had been waiting for the signal. I swore so loud Jill jolted upright. My hands fumbled for the phone app, switching to fire cam. The entire front yard was now bathed in yellow and orange, angry, searing light pulsing against the lens. The pumpkins exploded first, cracking, then bursting into flaming ceramic shrapnel. The porch railings lit up like they'd been dipped in oil. The sound was worse than I'd imagined. A low roar, alive, breathing. I was already calling 911. My fingers were shaking so badly I hit the wrong number first. Jill grabbed the blanket off the bed and pressed it to her chest like it might stop everything. Within 60 seconds, the entire porch was engulfed. The flames were licking at the garage siding. I couldn't tell if the window nearest the door had shattered or was just glowing red from inside. Everything smelled like plastic and terror. By the time the fire department arrived, the blaze had taken the left side of the house with it. They moved fast. Thank God. But the damage was done. The porch was reduced to charred timber and twisted nails. 2 garage windows had blown out from the heat. Jill's bike, the one she used on weekends to take Tommy to the park, was now a melted frame, half slumped against the brick wall like a forgotten skeleton. Ash was everywhere. You couldn't breathe without tasting it. That night, we went to a hotel. Tommy didn't cry. He sat on the windowsill in silence, staring at the blinking lights of the downtown skyline. He held one of his stuffed animals, singed slightly from the smoke, and asked in a soft voice, "Are we still allowed to live there?" I wanted to tell him yes with all the confidence in the world. I wanted to scoop him up and promise safety, stability, permanence. But all I could do was nod slowly, arms tight around him. Yes, I said, even though a part of me wasn't sure. Not yet. The next morning, the footage was already in the hands of the fire marshal and the arson unit. It helped. It wasn't blurry or speculative. It was damning. You could see the body language, the gait, the height. There was even a brief glimpse of the vehicle parked just beyond the curb. Late model SUV, navy blue, with a dent in the front passenger side fender. 2 days later, I got the call. Detective Vaughn. "We've made an arrest," she said. Jason Dorsley. Of course. He matched the height, the stride. He drove the exact make and model of the SUV seen leaving the scene. And there it was. Security footage from a gas station just a mile down the road, time-stamped 1:32 a.m. Jason filling a red gas can. He paid cash. No gloves. No effort to hide. And the matchbook. The one he dropped from a local diner that had stopped printing those 2 years ago. Vaughn's team confirmed only one person still regularly requested them out of nostalgia, Karen. At first, I couldn't tell if what I felt was grief or rage. It came in pulses, shock, fury, helplessness, and back again. Jill didn't say a word for nearly 24 hours. She just moved through the hotel room like a ghost, folding laundry that didn't need folding, organizing toiletries, repacking our overnight bag like we were living someone else's life now. Tommy asked if the man with the fire was going to jail. I told him yes, and this time I meant it. At the station, we gave full statements. They walked us through the charges: felony arson, enhancement due to intent to intimidate, endangerment of life, and conspiracy to commit property damage. Vaughn laid it out clearly. This was no longer about forged documents or HOA harassment. This, she said, was a coordinated effort to force you out, a deliberate, targeted act, and we're treating it as such. Karen still hadn't spoken publicly, not once. But her lawyer released a 2-sentence statement to the local paper. My client has no knowledge of or connection to the unfortunate incident on the Cranes' property. She is focused on asserting her rightful claim through legal channels. Rick, our attorney, nearly choked laughing. Then, without waiting for permission, he filed a formal motion to escalate the civil case. Now it was coordinated fraud, criminal conspiracy, and attempted unlawful property seizure. It wasn't just about proving she was wrong anymore. It was about proving she was dangerous. You're not just some unlucky family, Rick told me. This was systemic. She built an empire on forged compliance, fear, and silence. But you pulled the thread, and now it's all unraveling. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed that night, staring at Tommy's drawing. Our house, the big oak tree in front, the tiny porch swing hanging from the right side. Only now, the tree was shaded in gray, and the swing was gone. It broke me a little. So, I made him a promise. We were taking it back. The whole house, the porch, the tree, the life that was nearly taken from us. Brick by brick, nail by nail, memory by memory. We'd rebuild. And Karen was done underestimating us. Court isn't like the movies. There's no orchestral swell as justice is served, no gasps from the gallery as the villain confesses on the stand. There's just paperwork, endless paperwork, dry voices reading drier motions, buzzing fluorescent lights, and a kind of slow, grinding pressure that builds not from spectacle, but from truth, being forced to crawl its way through a system designed to resist speed. But every single minute we spent in that courtroom felt like the entire world was holding its breath. Not just me and Jill, not just the jury. The law itself, as if it was finally being asked to prove whether it still meant anything in places where corruption had taken root so quietly for so long. The trial lasted 5 days. 5 long, bitter, soul-draining days inside a Larimer County courtroom, painted in government-issue beige and lit like a hospital waiting room. The chairs were uncomfortable. The air conditioning clicked on and off unpredictably, making everything feel unstable. And at the defense table sat Karen. She wore a pale blue blouse that tried to say harmless and had her hair pinned into a style that screamed controlled. She didn't look at anyone, not us, not the gallery, not even Jason, who sat beside her in a charcoal suit that was clearly borrowed, the shoulders sagging like guilt. He looked worse than I remembered, eyes sunken, jaw clenched, skin pallid. He hadn't shaved, and it was obvious he hadn't slept in days, maybe weeks. The prosecution didn't waste time. They opened with the most damning evidence, the security footage. Everyone in the courtroom saw it. Jason crouching in the dark, red gas can in hand, tracing a line of accelerant from our porch toward the flower bed. Then came the match. The flame. The instant explosive bloom of fire leaping toward our home like it had been waiting. The room went still. No sound but the flick of the projector. The jury's eyes didn't move. Then came the forged agreement. The prosecution called a forensic document examiner who had spent years uncovering fraud. She testified with calm, clinical clarity. She didn't need drama. She had facts. She pointed to the signature on the alleged property agreement between Karen and the late Samuel Hargrave, my property's original owner. This signature, she said, tapping the screen, was traced. The ink flow is inconsistent with a natural signature. There is no pressure variance. The spacing is suspiciously identical to a known document signed earlier that year, almost certainly copied using a lightbox or similar tracing device. Then came the elder care specialist. She had overseen Samuel's guardianship in his final year and brought with her clear records. As of the date on that document, she said, Mr. Hargrave was legally under protective status and unable to authorize any financial transaction or property agreement. Any such action would have required written approval from the court. There is no such approval. Karen's attorney tried to spin it. He floated the idea that perhaps Karen had been duped, that maybe the agreement had been planted, and she was just another victim of Jason's reckless behavior. They even hinted that she'd never seen the real document herself. It collapsed quickly. Emails recovered from Karen's own laptop showed that she had scanned and sent that document, the fake one, to her attorney months before we had even moved to Colorado. She had titled the file, "Sam Agreement Final, Confidential." She knew exactly what she was doing and what she was trying to take. On day 4, it was our turn. Jill testified first. She was measured, deliberate, but you could hear the steel under her voice. She described the invasion, the ransacked closets, the overturned furniture, the feeling that someone had tried to erase us one drawer at a time. Then she talked about the fire. Her voice cracked just once, but that was enough. You could feel it land. Then I took the stand. I didn't perform. I just told the truth. I told them about the notes left under our door, the so-called inspections that no one had authorized. The day I found our wedding album soaking wet in the trash outside, the pictures curling from water damage. I told them how it felt to explain to my son that someone had tried to burn down his house while he slept. And I ended with this. She didn't just try to take our property. She tried to rewrite reality, document by document, lie by lie, until we either gave up or broke. But we didn't. We don't. Jason's defense team went with the oldest strategy in the book: blame displacement. They painted him as unstable, vulnerable, manipulated by a stronger personality. They said he didn't understand the full consequences of his actions, that he'd been promised something he didn't truly grasp. The DA responded with cold precision. They presented text messages. Not interpretation, not speculation, direct quotes. From Jason to Karen. "If we burn it, they'll run." Her reply, "They won't fight forever. Just scare them enough to step aside." It was over. On day 5, the attorneys gave their closing arguments. Karen still hadn't spoken, not a word, not to the jury, not to the judge, not even to Jason. She sat as she always had, rigid, collected, controlled, until the judge asked her directly, "Ms. Dorsley, would you like to make a statement before sentencing?" She stood, adjusted her sleeves like it was a job interview. Then she said clearly, "I was promised that house. I loved it. I tended the roses out front. I knew every creak in the stairs. Sam said it would be mine. He said it was just a matter of time." The judge raised an eyebrow. "But it wasn't yours." She looked him square in the face. It should have been." The silence that followed could have cracked the walls. Then came the verdicts. Jason Dorsley, guilty. 8 years in prison for felony arson, property destruction, and endangerment of life. No possibility of parole until at least 4 years served. Karen Dorsley, guilty. 12 years in prison for conspiracy to commit fraud, document forgery, unlawful entry, and attempted coercive eviction through intimidation and sabotage. When the judge read his final remarks, it wasn't with anger, it was with certainty. This is not a case of miscommunication or poor judgment. This is a case of entitlement weaponized through fraud. The defendants attempted to manufacture a false reality, enforce it through deceit and intimidation, and in doing so, endangered innocent lives. That ends today. There was no celebration, no outburst, no applause, just a deep collective exhale. Outside the courthouse, Rick shook my hand. "She's not coming back," he said. "It's over." The state awarded us $320,000 in damages, restitution for the fire, compensation for legal fees, emotional trauma, security reconstruction. Rick joked we could use the money to build a moat. I just wanted to go home, really go home, without locks changed by strangers, without fear on the front porch, without flames outside our windows or forged contracts sitting in courthouse folders. This time, I was walking through that door knowing it was over and knowing we had won. It took weeks to clean the smoke smell from the walls, even longer to retrain the mind not to flinch at shadows, to stop checking every window lock 3 times before bed, to trust the silence again, because trauma doesn't announce itself and exit like a burglar in the night. It lingers. Like mildew, like a low hum behind the drywall. It settles in the corners of your mind and waits for the lights to go out. For a long time, even quiet felt dangerous. But slowly, incrementally, the fear gave way to something else. Peace, not the naive kind we had before, but something earned, scarred, durable. We moved back into the house in mid-spring, just as the wildflowers began dotting the slope beyond the back fence. Purple coneflowers, bright orange firewheels, and patches of bluebonnets reclaiming the earth like it belonged to them all along. The air smelled like rebirth and sawdust. Rick's contractor friend, Tommy the other one, had done the rebuild on the porch. Rebuilt it stronger than before, with wider steps, deeper eaves, and solid cedar beams that made the whole structure feel like it could withstand a storm. He added a porch swing, unprompted. Said he felt like it needed one. Jill cried when she saw it, silent tears hand over her mouth. Tommy, our Tommy, immediately claimed the swing as his new command center, declared it a squirrel watchtower, and spent the next hour tracking rodent activity through his plastic spyglass, narrating their movements like a junior nature documentary host. The house was ours again, and this time, we knew what that meant. The insurance covered the basics, the smoke damage, the porch, the siding, but then the restitution came through. Faster than we expected, honestly. $320,000 wired directly to our account from the state treasury. By court order, I tried to give Rick a bonus. I figured after everything, he'd earned 10 of those jars we were metaphorically burying. He waved me off. Put it into the house, he said, or bury it in literal jars if that's what makes you feel safer. Just don't spend it on another security system. We've already installed Fort Knox. And he wasn't exaggerating. The new system had everything: biometric locks, motion-triggered floodlights, reinforced entry points, cameras with overlapping fields of view, and redundant power backups. I could check a live feed of the backyard in 2 seconds flat from my phone. I could even review thermal readings if I wanted to know whether a possum had visited overnight. I'd never been a paranoid man. Now I was just prepared. And the strange thing was, it didn't make us feel trapped. We didn't walk around the house like survivors of a siege. We left the doors open when we could. Jill went back to teaching. Remote at first, but the university downtown had already offered her a full-time position for the fall. Tommy, on his own initiative, planted a tree in the backyard, dug the hole himself with a plastic spade, helped Jill lower the sapling, then carefully packed in the soil. "It's like the old tree," he said, "but this one's ours." He named it Sam. Said it was for the man who built the house before us, the one who gave it up so we could live here. He didn't mean it like that. He didn't understand the depth of what he'd said, but it hit me square in the chest. Then, one Saturday in early June, a U-Haul rolled into the driveway next door. It was the first time someone had moved in since the fire, since the arrest, since the trial. We'd seen realtors come and go, heard whispers about how hard it was to sell a house that had made local headlines. But that day, they came. Quiet, efficient. No fuss, no clipboard. Around sunset, someone knocked at our door. I opened it with the kind of caution I didn't used to have. A part of me was ready to see another Karen, but standing there was an older black couple, late 60s maybe. Both wore soft expressions, kind eyes. The man extended a hand without hesitation. "Jerome Carter," he said, "and this is my wife, Maureen. We're your new neighbors." Maureen stepped forward and held out a Tupperware container. Inside were 6 golden cornbread muffins, still warm. "We heard the last neighbor was intense," she said, with a wink that somehow both acknowledged and dismissed the storm that had passed through the street. "Figured we'd start things off the opposite way." We laughed, invited them in. They stayed for an hour. We sat on the new swing and watched the sun slip behind the trees, casting long shadows over the lawn. Jill and Maureen clicked instantly, talking about schools, teaching, and homemade peach preserves. Jerome showed Tommy how to make a twig spin in the air using only a rubber band and a little patience. Tommy's eyes lit up like someone had handed him a new superpower. When it was time to go, I walked them partway back across the gravel. The air was still warm, but the wind had cooled a little, brushing against the freshly painted siding like a quiet promise. At the edge of the path, Jerome paused. He turned back to me, voice calm and low. "I'm glad you stayed," he said. "A lot of folks run when things get ugly. But this house, it needed people who'd fight for it." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I looked up at the wooden sign Jill had hung by the gate. "A gift from Rick's paralegal, laser cut and painted by hand. Private property not for Karens." I smiled. "Yeah," I said, "it finally feels like ours."